In this video, we're going to discuss PrimeNG's vertical timeline and horizontal timeline. This is the vertical timeline, and this is the horizontal timeline. This is PrimeNG version 19, and we're looking at the page here for timeline. It starts out with vertical timeline, and it gives you your basic information, and then it gets into alignment. So this is the default. So this is left and this is right and this is alternate. Default, here's right and here's alternate. Now, one thing I've noticed when I see right, I'm thinking, oh, the text should be on the right. No, that's where this timeline resides. By default, it's on the left side. You can change it to the right side, or you can alternate it. So it starts out with the default here, then it goes over to the alternate, default, alternate, and it goes back and forth. Here's one that's called opposite. You've got a section here. So if you noticed up here, you've got these labels. So that's your content. So this is content and this is opposite. So content is over here, opposite is over here. It doesn't matter which order these are in. These are both templates, and the handle or the anchor to the template is this pound opposite and pound content. We get down into here, we get into a little fancier template, and this is not difficult to do. It's just a little time consuming, but it's easy to do. Marker is this little guy right here. So the checkbox, the shopping cart, the gear, and the shopping cart. Notice the shopping carts, there's a purple one and here's a yellow one. They're just using color to show that it's been shipped or it's been ordered. And they're using a gear here to show, with a purple background, to show that it is in processing. And then they have a greenish gray background to show that it was delivered. And these are cards. Let's go on down here and let's look at the show. So it's set up, the timeline is set up as alternate, and here's the marker, and this is coming from the event. The event is the timeline events that's coming in. So remember, this is a template of how it's going to be shown on your screen. The event is the data. We'll get into that in just a bit here. So here's a horizontal. Default is on top. An alternate way of doing it is on the bottom. The timeline is on the bottom. And then this is alternate, where it alternates between top and bottom. And here's the top, here's the bottom, and here's the alternate. So you can see the alignment there. Let's discuss the API. So in the API, here's your properties, defines the input properties of the component and the value of any. You can type this so that it's not any. I've got my application set up so that it wants to have something other than any. And then your style, inline style, and style class. So these are the things that go into the tag for timeline right here. Let's go on down, let's look at templates here. Templates, you have content, opposite, and marker. Now we're going to look at the theming where it says CSS classes. These are the classes that are available, that are being used. And here's the design tokens. These are not classes, these are variables. And this is the token in the styling for PrimeNG. When you get into styling, And we'll cover that a little bit in this video. But you'll be changing this. It won't look like this. It'll say timeline, and it'll say event, and then min height will be one word with a capital H there. So that's one of the things that you've got to get used to when you're looking at the tokens. This is the variable, and here's a description of that variable. Now if you go down here, built-in presets. These are the theme presets. And we're in this project, we're going to be working with Aura, and cyan is my base color. Okay, now we will discuss the data that's coming in. Let me show you the data that I'm using for the demo here. So this is my data, and it's coming in initiate, transmission, error. So what I'm doing is I'm emulating a transmission either over the air or however you want to do it. It might be between two computers, over modem, which is old school, or over the internet. Usually this would be like over the modem, or closest to that would be cell phone to cell phone. Vehicles today have cell phone technology built into them. People's phones get updated. Your computer gets updated. Any one of those scenarios would be similar to this. So here's the initiate transmission, and then I've got my errors. Got 1, 2, 3, 4 errors. So if we go down here, we see 1, 2, 3, 4 errors, and then an unknown, and then a warning, and then transmitting packets. Now over here you'll notice that it gives more detail than you see in these. Now this is the very basic, so it's minimal information. This is just your message. If I hide that, and then let's talk about just the icon. So the difference between this and this is I'm using an icon, and the icon you'll notice is not in here. What it's doing is it's using the status, to trigger the icon. You may choose to do it a different way, but that's how I'm doing it here, just for demonstration purposes. This message here, so the date. Now this date it's an actual date object. So I'm using a date object, not a string. I know it's showing as a string here. A lot of people get confused on this. But this is a date object displayed as a string here. And you'll notice the capital T there. That's how you can tell that this is a date object displayed as a string. And so the time, if you look at, here's 12, 14, 16. Now, I hard-coded this. It's not actual data, but I tried to emulate what actual data would look like. So if we go down, here's the end, and here's the end. So here's the date over here. I kept the date over on the side to be consistent. And then you'll see the additional information here. So the description is what's showing up down in here. To be honest, between horizontal and vertical, this was the most difficult to style. And at this point, it doesn't look hard, doesn't look very difficult at all. But when you go to alignment, alternate alignment, that's where it gets weird. Notice how this is just spaced out. Well, I had to space it out in order to get consistency between the two sides. And I'm favoring this one here. That's why there's so much space up here. If my messages are longer than 2 lines or maybe 3 lines, it becomes difficult to style. That's something just to note and just be aware of. But if we go back and we look at the vertical now, let's go to alternate here. This is pretty good. And the only issue I had here was when I was in default mode. I had no space here. So I had to go in and add a space. Okay, we are looking at the cyan aura theme. And in here, I search for timeline. And then I searched for vertical and horizontal. Vertical is the first one I had to adjust. So this, without the extend, this is what came by default. This is how it comes. And because of this, I had no space. So it's top, right, bottom, left. Remember, it's always top, right, bottom, left. This bottom didn't exist. So if I set this to 0, it's the same as we have here. So now that I've set that back, let me save that. Let's go back and look at the web, and we'll see how this is showing up. Now if you'll notice, there's no space here, and that's because of that change I just did. Let's go back to the code, and let's reset that back the way it was, the way I had it. And let's save that. And let's go back to the web now. And now you can see I've got the space in there. Let's go back to the code. So that is something I had to do for both of these. And it's a little different, it's swapped up here. So this is the top, this is the right, bottom, and the left. So when I set this back and I save that, let's go back to the web and let's look at the horizontal. Notice how it's all bunched together. Okay, that's what I had to take care of here. So if we go back to the code and set that back the way I had it, let's go back to the web, and we got our space back. The top has 1 rem. That's what pushes it here, pushes it down from the icon. And then the right has 0.75 rem. The bottom has 1 rem, and the left side has 0 rem. Okay, so that is what we had to do there. All right, let's talk about the code now. Some of between the horizontal and the vertical, so here's the horizontal, here's the vertical. I had common code, so I split that out into a core. So timeline core, I have the exact same variables in both. And here is where I'm using that status, initiate, transmitting, verify, to change the styling, the color, and also the icon. So here's where the icon gets set. You'll notice I'm doing some PrimeNG icons and some font awesome icons. And you can switch back and forth. This right here is just a catch if I have a new status that's not been configured. This will then show up. And in this case here, I have an unknown, TL unknown. TL is timeline, just my naming convention. So if we go back and we look in here we see extends timeline core. So timeline core is just a class. It's been exported and it's nothing fancy, very basic. So I'm extending that, which means that everything in here I have to call the super in the constructor, and then I can set the default for that. So this is a signal. You have to use the set command because signals are wrapped basically. So you have your variables that are wrapped in a signal, and that signal is where we need to all migrate to, because eventually you want to be able to run without the zone. So you want to switch to signals. All right, so here you can see this is for the vertical. I have left and right and alternate. And for the horizontal, I have top, alternate, and bottom. And then here's my data. So the data I have coming from this file right here. It's just a TS file emulating. So if you have a service, let's say your service is pulling in your data, that's where this would be coming from. So your vertical was easier to work with than the horizontal. And let's get into some of the styling we had to do. So here's the vertical styling. Let's close that. And I'm using use. Now, most of us have not migrated to use yet. I was forced into it here because it kept complaining it wouldn't compile, and it said you had to use. Well, I was using import because import's what I was used to. That with SAS, you need to be using use now, use and forward. Now notice I have as base. I didn't need to do this aliasing, but I did because it makes it a little easier in here. So the error I got when I first did this is not working. It doesn't know where to find it. It's without use of explicit imports. Well, here's my import. I was frustrated. It's like, what? So I figured out, okay, I got to do my base and that. Originally, I just put timeline base, but it's like, it's a lot of extra typing. So I just did as base. And then here I can just do base to get my mix-ins. So I still do an include there. And now here's your extra small, text extra small, date, time, and description. If we go over and we look at our code here, so this is another piece that was common between all of them, or between the two. I separated that out. I'll show you that in just a moment here. And it's using signals to move data back and forth, and I'll explain why I had to do this. But in the meantime, let's get back to here. So here's the minimal. So if minimal's turned on, this shows. Let me show you in the web how that works. So if I turn off this minimal, you'll see it disappears. And I can turn off all of them actually if I wanted to, or just a particular one. So that is how this works right here. So this if statement is how you show minimal, show add icon, show add date time, show card with details. This was the easiest one right here. It's just minimal information. Okay, now we're going to take a look at the API here. So in the API, we have content, and we have opposite, and we have marker. What are those? Let's go back and look at this. So this is content. This is the marker. Okay, here you can see content is being used. Marker's not being used yet. Here we have opposite and content. So opposite is this right here. It's the time, the date and the time. And then here's the content. So opposite. Now notice the let event. So there's the event that gets pulled in here is passed into the template. Here's marker. So here we see marker being used. And marker is setting up the event icon and then coming down into here. So they're actually passing an icon in their event. And then here's the content. So here's marker and content. They're not using opposite. Opposite would show up here or here. So it's going to be opposite. And this is using alternate alignment. Here we get into the horizontal. Horizontal has content, alternate, and the marker. So they're doing the same type of thing, and they don't give you as much information. You just have to kind of figure it out. But the vertical is the easiest one to do. Let's go back and look at the API again. Here's your layout, vertical or horizontal. By default, it's vertical if you don't give a layout. And then your align. This is the left, right, or top, bottom, depending if it's vertical or horizontal. So left, right is for vertical. Top, bottom is for horizontal. Alternate is the same for both. Style class, as everything else with PrimeNG, you can pass in your own style class here. And then here's an inline style, and then here's a value. It's when we got to the card, so I'm using a card in that third line, or fourth, that fourth grouping. So this is a card right here. Let's go back, and let's go back up, and let's look at the theming. In the design theme, I had to search for timeline, and then I found these pieces here, and then I also found these being used, and I don't know if I used these, but I did utilize this to go in and change some things which I've already shown you. I changed them in the theming. All right, let's go back and let's talk about some of the code here. In the vertical timeline, we can see here where in the show add icon, I'm adding the marker. So here's what I did for the marker, and here's how I got my icon. So I'm taking the event. So if we go into get icon, I take my event, I look at the status, I see what that is, and then I pass back a string of what the icon value is. Let's go back here. And then the content is just showing the status. Notice I'm passing the event through the let command on the template here. And so here's the pipeline. In all cases, this is my value. This is the data that's coming in. Now my data is fixed here. You might have constant data being updated. Let's say you've got a timeline that you're watching as it's occurring. So you might have something feeding this through an asynchronous process. And this is where you would set it. Now the align is coming through a signal here, and that signal is set up right up here, alignment item. Okay. And now when I get down into here, add date and time, this is more information. So the add date and time will show on the web. So here's the date and time. So here's the date and time. Here's the marker. And here's the content. So content's at the bottom. We switch this around. Bottom align, which means the marker is underneath the content, and the opposite is showing now down here. So this is how you can switch that around. If I show this on, you can see here, content marker, opposite, content containing a card, the marker, and the opposite. Let's go back to the code. So that's the add date and time. And then here is the show card with details. So in here I got my timeline, and then inside my timeline I have a card. And so the card is in this block right here. As you can see, I have not affected any, I have not made any changes to the card in the theme. This is totally unaffected here. So that's one of the good things. Now let's talk about the options. The options is this piece up here, this whole block. So I can turn things on and off. I can make changes to the screen, and it works the same for both horizontal and vertical. So I can turn on different pieces there. Let's go back to the code. Let's take a look at options. So pipeline options. It's this guy right here. So in here, I have input and I have model. Why do I have input and then I have model? Model is for two-way binding. Input is for just input binding. That's important to understand. And how do I use them differently? Well, if you'll notice, this one is the input binding. I had to put the open close parenthesis there. Here, I'm just passing a pointer, the way I think about it. I have a C background, and in C we had pointers we passed around. I'm not sure if that's exactly the right way to think about it, but that's the way I look at it. So instead of passing the value, I'm passing the actual object, or a reference to the object here. Think of it that way maybe. This is my selected alignment item, show minimal, and all these other shows. Now, originally, I had worked them with that, and it wasn't working. I couldn't understand why, and so when I took that out, it worked. So that's something to keep in mind. Notice, this is an input only, so it's got the square brackets. Banana in a box, square bracket with regular parenthesis. This is input and output, and so that's the model. Input and model. The other thing is you pass in the type that you want to have in there. Notice I don't have any. I look at any as a enemy. So any is not your friend. Sometimes you have to use it, but use it sparingly and only when necessary. It's getting to where, especially if you lint's not going to like it. It's going to say, oh, don't like any, and you'll have to put a statement. There is one place in the code I think I had to do that, so lint didn't complain about it. Let's take a look at the options HTML. Let's close that. So in here, you'll notice align items. It's got the open, close parenthesis, and just because that's an input, everything else does not have that. That's because it's a model. So model, if you'll notice here, it's input and output. This is only input. That's important to understand. And this is how that is done. And then this is what's showing up on the screen. Let's show you. This part right up here is what we were seeing here. That's where this is coming from. Timeline core. You'll notice these things are being passed in. Now notice, here's where my signals are defined. But this, because it's a component, these are input and input-output, bidirectional. This is one direction because it's an input. These are two-way direction, input and output, because these are modal. And notice the string here, the types are all, so selected item, that's a string, alignment items, and this is the timeline timeline items. This is not over here. This is your data coming in. So that's a signal. It's getting it there as well. So back, now this is the horizontal. So in the vertical, the only difference is this is setting the timeline items, which you don't see over here. And this is using a set command to set the left and to set the information there. I did as timeline alignment item. It's just a habit I've got. I think it's a good habit to have. You're ensuring that your type is set correctly. And I call super because I've got to extend. Let's talk about styling of the colors. In root, and here's root with dark theme. These will always be set even if you have dark theme set. So this is going to execute, And then dark theme only overrides specific ones of these. It's not overriding everything, it's only overriding those that change. I've seen people duplicate this code down in the dark theme, and it's not necessary. You only need to put in the dark theme just the items that are going to change with dark theme. Everything else will stay consistent and will not change. I'm going to upload this to GitHub, and you can play around with it. You can change colors, play around with it, see how it goes. Now this right here, this is something that I had to figure out to get things styled properly. So min height, and this is the horizontal. So this is ptimeline dot ptimeline alternate dot ptimeline horizontal, and this is for the content and the opposite. In both scenarios, you need that height. Let me illustrate by showing you on the web here. So let's go to the horizontal. So if we go to alternate, let's turn off these others. So you can see the alternate, it sets it up this way. Here's your opposite, here's your content, and here's your marker. If we don't have that piece of code in there, let me go back to the code. And I'm going to comment this out just so you can see the effect. Compile that. Let's go back to the web. Turn these off. And go to alignment. See how it's all over the place? And that's because this card is pushing this marker up. This card's pushing the marker down. And the opposite it's filling its space, but it's not pushing anything. So I fix that by doing this right here. So min height will take care of that. Let's go back here, turn these off again, go to alternate. So there's your min height, takes care of it. So I applied min height of 10 EM. If you need to have more lines of data here in the description, then you're going to need to expand that. I can probably go one or two more lines without the card expanding. When you see this line wavering, it's not a straight line, that's a sign that that needs to be done. Now the other thing is I put a padding of left of 0.0, and notice here, see where this last one is coming? So we got 2 green and then the blue here. So let's turn that back on. Let's go back to the code, and I'm going to turn that on, save that, go back to the web, turn these off again. Every time I make a change, it resets things back to the way it was. Now notice that blue is still there, but it's kind of pushed over now. It was around there, I think, but now it's way over here. And that's because I added a little more padding there. So if I go back and I add, let's just make it 5 EM, just so you can see a drastic change. And let's go back to the web, turn these off. Now watch when I do the alignment. So there's a big change there. So it's actually pushing it. All right. So let's go back to the code and make that 0.5. All right, so now we are back to the padding as it was. I've left these in here so you can play around with it. Let's just well, first of all, before I get into that, I want to explain how I came up with this. Notice that there's no space between these. That's very important. There's a space after horizontal to this and to this, but not in here. So what this means, if you don't know CSS or SAS very well, this is something that's important for you to understand. P-Timeline is notice there's no dot in front of it. This is the component, P-Timeline. Then here's P-Time alternate. So when the alternate gets turned on, there's a class that gets assigned to P-Timeline. And when you're in horizontal mode, there's a class assigned to P-Timeline. So let's take a look at that on the web. All right, so we're going to alternate, and we're going to take a look. We're going to inspect this. Here's P-Timeline. And here's the layout. Now we're looking for class. So here's class, and it's got P-Timeline. Actually, I could put a dot in front of that. Probably should. In fact, I will do that. And then it says P-Timeline horizontal, and then P-Timeline alternate. Now they don't have to be in that order, but as long as they are assigned that way. Let's go back into the code here. Let me put a dot in front of that. And let's save that. And go back to the web. And go to alternate. So even these, you'll notice, it does that. So here's the P-Timeline, timeline horizontal, timeline alternate. So here's that piece of code right there. And if I change that, you see without that, how it messes things up. And this right here, so this is your padding to the left. Remember, padding is internal, margin is external from the square or the box. I'm referring to the HTML box or the CSS box. So if I go here, you'll see these boxes are highlighted. See if I can get, here's timeline's a whole thing. There's a particular one. So here's an event. Okay, so that event. Now notice that does not affect the vertical timeline. Vertical timeline has not been changed. Let's go back over to the code. If I wanted to do vertical timeline, I would then, let's copy that, duplicate it, change this to vertical. So what I'm changing here is, this is down in my base. So anything in the base, I did another video where I talked about making changes to the PrimeNG styles without having to do host and ng deep. You notice I'm not using ng deep here. It's not in this CSS or SAS file anywhere. Let's go vertical. Min height, let's make it min width. And padding bottom. And let's save that. Let's go back to the web. Now we made a change here. Watch what it does when we go to alternate alignment. Just timeline, alternate, vertical. Okay, here's my change right here. So 10 EM is the width, and the padding, they're padding here. Yeah, 0.75 rem. See it right there, 0.75 rem. That's the third parameter, so that's going to be the bottom. So it starts at the top, the right, the bottom, and the left. So the left is 1 rem, the right is 1 rem, the top is 0, and the bottom is 0.75. And it's coming out of this variable here. If I change this, if I turn that off, you see it goes wider. Let's make that white. Well, let's go back into the code here. And let's make that 5M, just so it's visible. Let's go back to the web. Okay, so you can see it here on this guy. You've got 5M here. That's quite a distance. Your designer might want that type of thing, so just keep that in mind. But that's how you would change that. It didn't change it in here, so you don't have to have opposite there. But if opposite is there, it'll apply it. It's only alternate. So you can play around with this part of it. I'll leave this in. I'm going to comment this out, but I'll leave this in so that you can play around with it and experiment. And I will put this in GitHub. I want to point out that steps is something that is different from timeline. So timeline is when you have data coming in or a history of data. You might have a timeline screen showing logs. Let's say you have logs that you want to see how things progressed. I know that when we write code not to support, but mostly to get the job done. I like to write code that actually helps with the support. So as a support idea, you might want to use timeline to help you go through your logs, and you can filter things. You can set up a filtering device. So I would strongly suggest that you develop tools to help you with your job. Otherwise, you're going to be repeating the same process over and over and over, and that is a nightmare. I hope this makes sense. The code will be up on GitHub. I hope this video has helped you. Please like and subscribe, and we will continue to make more videos. Thank you.